so sorry. This case was crazy. It reminded me, okay, I'll tell you at the end because I don't want to spoil. No spoilers, unless you know this case already. Anyway, I am going to tell you about Dorothea Puente. And this lady, let me tell you, she was born Dorothea Helen Gray, January 9th of 1929 in Redlands, California. She was the sixth of 7 children, but she didn't really have a stable family environment. Her father died of tuberculosis when she was 8, and her mother, who was an alcoholic, routinely abused her children and actually died in a motorcycle accident 1 year later. Orphaned, Dorothea and her siblings kind of were splintered off in different directions. They bounced between foster care and relatives. Dorothea struck out on her own when she was just 16 years old. In Olympia, Washington, she tried to make a living as a sex worker. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. YouTube doesn't like it. But Dorothea found a husband. She met and married Fred McFall in 1945. But this marriage is described as brief. Only 3 years, and it hinted at trouble beneath the surface. Dorothea had several children with him, but she didn't actually raise them. She sent one child to live with her relatives and put another one up for adoption. By 1948, McFall asked for a divorce, and Dorothea drifted south to California. There, she turned back to a life of crime. She got in serious trouble for the first time in her life after bouncing a check in San Bernardino, and she spent 4 months in jail. She was supposed to stick around and serve out her probation, but she skipped town instead, because, why not? Next, she moved on to San Francisco, where she married her second husband, a man named Axel Bryn Johansson, and this was 1952. But trouble seemed to follow Dorothea wherever she went, or maybe she was trouble. The new couple argued frequently about her drinking and gambling. When she offered to perform a sex act on an undercover cop at a house of ill repute, her husband sent her to a psychiatric ward. Despite all this, their marriage lasted longer than her first marriage, until 1966. Dorothea's next 2 marriages would also be short-lived. She married Roberto Puente in 1968, but their relationship dissolved 16 months later. She then married a man named Pedro Angel Montalvo, but he left her after only a week. Despite all evidence to the contrary, Dorothea Puente believed herself to be an able caretaker. Lady, you are not even taking care of your own kids. I'm gonna need you to beep the bus up, like back up a couple steps. Okay. In the 1970s, she opened up her first boarding house in Sacramento. Social workers in the 70s looked upon Dorothea Puente and her boarding house and she was released just 3 years later. Although a state psychologist diagnosed her as schizophrenic with no remorse or regret, who should be closely monitored. Instead of that, she opened up her second boarding house. Oh, I gotta sneeze. Why does that always happen? When I'm filming. Why? Oh. Alright, so the second boarding house, and she is quickly back to her old tricks. She takes in what people called the shadow people. People who were marginally homeless without anyone who would notice they were missing. No close family and no friends. And some of them began to disappear, but no one noticed. Even probation officers who stopped by accepted Dorothea's explanation that the people living at her house were guests or friends, not boarders. In April of 1982, a 61-year-old woman named Ruth Monroe moved into Dorothea Puente's house. Soon after that, she died of an overdose from codeine and acetaminophen. When police arrived, Dorothea told them that Monroe had been depressed because of her husband's terminal illness. Satisfied with this explanation, authorities ruled her death a suicide and moved on. In November of 1985, Dorothea hired a handyman named Ismael Flores to install some wood paneling in her boarding house. After he finished the job, Dorothea had one more request. She wanted him to build her a 6-foot-long box so she could fill it with books and other assorted items before the two of them would take the box to a storage facility. But on the way to the storage facility, Dorothea abruptly asked Flores to pull over near a riverbank and just push the box into the water. On New Year's Day, fishermen spotted the box and noticed that it looked suspiciously like a coffin. They called the police, and investigators soon found the decomposing body of an elderly man inside. However, it would be 3 more years before authorities could identify the body as one of the tenants of Dorothea Puente's house. Now, it wasn't until 1988 that suspicions first arose about Dorothea, after one of her tenants, 52-year-old Alvaro Montoya, went missing. Montoya struggled with mental health issues, and he had been homeless for years, which I cannot imagine. He had been referred, there's no O in there, to Dorothea's house because of her sterling reputation Sacramento. On the way back, she insisted to reporters that she hadn't killed anyone. She even said, "I used to be a very good person at one time. Not anymore, Grandma." Throughout the trial, Dorothea was portrayed as either a sweet, grandma-like type or a manipulative criminal who preyed on the weak. Her lawyers argued that she might be a thief, but she sure wasn't a murderer. I mean, look at her. Pathologists testified that they hadn't been able to determine the cause of death for any of the corpses. John O'Mara, the prosecutor, called over 130 witnesses to the stand. The prosecution stated that Dorothea had used sleeping pills to drug her tenants. She suffocated them and then hired convicts to bury them in the yard. Dalmane, which is a drug used for insomnia, was found in all 7 of the exhumed bodies. Prosecutors said that Dorothea Puente was one of the most cold and calculating female killers the country had ever seen. In 1993, after several days of deliberation and a deadlocked jury, Dorothea Puente was ultimately convicted of 3 murders. 3 out of 7. You heard me correctly. She received back-to-back life sentences. These entities fall through the cracks, says Kathleen Lammers, executive director of the California Law Center, about boarding houses like Puente's. Not everyone running them is nefarious, but nefarious activity can crop up. But to the end of her life, Dorothea insisted she was innocent, and that she had been taking good care of the people under her charge. The only time that the boarders were in good health was when they stayed at my home, she said. I made them change their clothes, take a bath, eat 3 meals a day. When they came to me, they were so sick, they were not expected to live. Dorothea Puente passed away in prison of natural causes on March 27th, 2011, at the age of 82. This case to me is crazy because it reminds me of that case, that movie Arsenic and Old Lace by Cary Grant. With Cary Grant. I have English somewhere, guys, really I do. If you've never seen it, it is these old aunties and they are poisoning these men who they think have no family and they're lonely, and that they are doing like this good thing by doing this, and the Cary Grant's character discovers like a body in the window seat, and he's like, what the heck is happening? And then the body disappears, and then I think it ends up being another body, and then I haven't seen it in so long, it's black and white even, like his cousin shows up, and his cousin is like a murderer who's changed his face a bunch. It's so good. Boris Karloff's in it. If you've not seen it, you definitely have to check that one out, but I digress. Okay. Dorothea Puente is like the quintessential serial killer, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her victims now, because I really feel like there's just not enough information about them. I didn't want to bog down the whole case with it. So the first one was Malcolm Mackenzie, who was age 74. She picked him up from a bar. She took him back to his apartment. He reported that she had slipped something in his drink before robbing him of money, watches, and other jewelry, including a diamond ring that belonged to his mother. suicide. However, it was later classified as a homicide. Let's see. Their grand theft charges. Let's see. I believe that yes, okay. I wanted to make sure I got it correct. So, she was picked up for grand theft charges for a robbery, and she was sentenced to those years in prison, where she only served the 3 years. While she was there, she started corresponding with a man named Everson Theodore Gilmuth. He was 77, and he was a retiree from Oregon. At the beginning of September in 1985, he came to Sacramento with his truck and his trailer, and he arrived at Dorothea's boarding house. On September 9th, after serving only half of her sentence, she was released. She was picked up by this man and a friend who lived with his family in the downstairs flat. In October of 1985, Dorothea wrote to Gilmuth's sister, informing her that she and Gilmuth were to be married November 2nd. A short time later, she hired the handyman for remodeling, asked him to build the coffin-y thing. She agreed to give this man Gilmuth's truck and $800 as payment. After he completed the box, he returned to find the box nailed shut. They drove it to the river and dumped it in, and it had the body. Gilmuth was the previously unidentified body that the police found. After his death, Dorothea mailed fake letters and cards to his sister in an attempt to make her believe that he was still alive. She found his signature on his truck's title and continued cashing his benefit checks until July of 1986. That's crazy. That's crazy. He was found in the river in January. Whatever. Okay. In the fall of '86, a woman named Betty Mae Palmer arrived at the boarding house. On October 14th, Dorothea obtained a California ID card with her picture and Betty Mae Palmer's name. 2 months later, the mailing address on Betty Mae's Social Security checks was changed to Dorothea's boarding house. Dorothea forged her signature and cashed nearly $7,000 worth of benefit checks. And then, in November of 1988, her body was partially dismembered and discovered in a shallow hole in Puente's yard. Her head, her hands, and her lower legs were never found. Toxicology reports revealed the presence of doxylamine, an over-the-counter antihistamine, as well as haloperidol and flurazepam, both of which were previously prescribed to Palmer. She was identified January 24th, 1989, through comparison with previous medical x-rays. On October 21st, 1986, Dorothea summoned a notary to the hospital room of Leona Carpenter following a flurazepam overdose. She was given power of attorney over Carpenter and began cashing her Social Security checks just 10 days later. In December, after Carpenter was released from the hospital, she went to live with Dorothea. Once again, she returned to the hospital, and just a few days later, she was discharged. In February of 1987, she disappeared. In November of '88, her body was discovered in the southeast corner of Dorothea Puente's yard. Toxicology reports of Carpenter's brain tissue revealed the presence of codeine, diazepam, and flurazepam. In February of '87, James Gallup, 62, moved into Dorothea's home. On July 20th, '87, a potentially malignant tumor was found in his colon. He agreed to further testing, but Dorothea later contacted his doctor's office, notifying them that he had gone to LA indefinitely. His body was found buried under a gazebo in the yard. Eugene Gamble was found dead of an apparent suicide, having overdosed on amitriptyline and ethanol. Dorothea, who was Gamble's landlady, said that he had a history of suicide attempts. And though Dorothea was never charged with his murder, he was considered a possible victim. On October 2nd, 1987, Vera Faye Martin was sent to live with Dorothea. Starting October 5th, Puente forged a number of Martin's Social Security checks totaling over $7,000. On October 19th, so if you're not keeping track, that's 17 days later, she failed to contact her daughter for her birthday, which she had always done every year. In November, her body was found buried under a metal shed in Dorothea's yard. Toxicology reports of her brain and liver revealed fluorazepam. Yeah, I'm not done. On October 21st, 87, Dorothy Miller was placed in an upstairs flat in Dorothea's home. She introduced Dorothy to Ricardo Orcadia. And the following November, Ricardo became the representative payee for Miller's Social Security benefits. Just weeks after her arrival, Dorothy Miller had disappeared, and on November 20th, 87, Dorothea hired a carpet cleaner to remove a large pile of foul-smelling slime in Miller's room. Puente continued to forge Miller's checks totaling $11,000 after she was no longer at her home. Miller's remains were later discovered buried under a slab of concrete near some rose bushes. Tissue samples from her brain revealed the presence of carbamazepine, I don't know that one, and fluorazepam. On November 29th, 1987, 87 was a busy year for Dorothea. Brenda Trujillo sent a letter to the Social Security office accusing Dorothea of stealing her Social Security checks, totaling $3,500. Brenda had met Dorothea in the Sacramento County Jail in 82, and the two of them later shared a prison cell. After her release, she moved into Dorothea's boarding house, where Dorothea helped her apply for Social Security benefits. Brenda claimed that Dorothea drugged her and called her parole officer, causing her parole to be revoked before Brenda could receive the checks. This woman is crazy. Just like... In February of 88, Alvaro Bert Gonzalez Montoya arrived at Dorothea's home. In March, an application designating Dorothea as Montoya's benefits payee was filed. At the end of August, a roommate saw a man clearing out his clothes out of the closet. He'd missed an appointment on August 29th and was last seen August 24th. Dorothea told several people that he went to Mexico to visit his relatives. Social workers continued to attempt to contact him in September and October to no avail. In November, Dorothea asked Donald Anthony, a former convict who had been working in her yard, to contact the social worker, pretending to be Montoya's brother-in-law, and he agreed. He called and stated his name was Michael Obergon, and that he'd picked up Montoya from this house and took him to Utah. Whatever. Montoya's body was found buried adjacent to Carpenter, and toxicology results revealed loxapine, fluorazepam, diphenhydramine, amitriptyline, and carbamazepine. Montoya had prescriptions for all of the drugs except for the carbamazepine. On March 9th, 1988, Benjamin Fink was sent to live with Dorothea. His brother visited him on a weekly basis for 6 weeks. By the end of April, Fink was gone. Another tenant reported smelling a foul odor emanating from his room, but was told by Dorothea that it was sewer backup. On April 29th, Dorothea received 12 bags of cement. That June, she had